Alright, post-production Ho here. You may hear some background noise. It's bloody hot today and my window is open so I don't die. Two things I want to add in. Number one, we're doing the 24-hour fundraiser again for Ukrainian orphans to make sure that we can get as many Christmas presents as possible to both those who are disabled and live in care homes, like the one I visited in Vilshani when I was over in Ukraine earlier this year, but also for those who have been orphaned by the war. Things like getting them Christmas presents, getting Santa to come and visit them, things like that. Just a way to make these little worlds just a bit better. Secondly, I am aware that there have been some major changes to Patreon in the way that Apple takes money now, and Apple actually takes a much higher cut than it used to. So for those who naturally don't want to use Apple anymore, I completely understand for patrons. There's the channel membership option. But also I have created an Amazon wishlist of basically the books that I use to research upcoming videos, such as the history of Belarus. And yes, I'm working on something very long about the Kuznetsov. Side note, the giant Kuznetsov on that list is there as a meme. It is a meme. I say again, it's a meme. Do not. It's a meme. I don't actually need it. It's just a giant Kuznetsov for the meme because the Kuznetsov helped make this channel what it is today. Not even kidding, it got me 10,000 subs in like 3 days. It's why the channel took off. So, that chip did something, right? But yeah, just wanted to let you know. Now, go back, enjoy the video, have fun, and as always, remember, and then it got worse. Thanks for checking the video out. Get it? Check.
Please clap.
Lake Baikal is a fascinating place. The deepest rift lake in the world, astonishingly beautiful during the winters, and the home of a really tasty little fish that only comes from it. I travelled to this part of Russia back in 2016, and I'm glad I did because that trip gave me the perspective on the world I have today. During this little trip, I came across a fascinating little bit of information about the lake during the Russian Civil War that just blew my mind, and that was icebreaker combat. I found this out when I went on quite possibly the worst maintained museum ship I have ever seen in my entire life, and for those who don't know, I travel to different parts of the world purely to see museum ships and then pretend to my family that, oh, we're here for a holiday, not actually to let me gawk at HMS Victory for about an hour and go, oh, look how nice this holiday is. No, I'm going for the boats. The holiday is the bonus. But this little museum ship was the icebreaker, Angara. And the Angara had this little plaque on its lower decks where there was this sort of makeshift theatre room set up with some old looking projector. And it was this word. Now I can't really pronounce that in the right sort of accent without giving away what it is. But I was about 18 at the time, and I didn't understand too much, if all any, Cyrillic. But I recognised that word, and I had this moment where I just turned around and said really loudly, well, not really loudly, it was just echoed because the thing's empty, what the fuck? Because 18-year-old me had just discovered that the Czechoslovakians, yeah, that word means Czechoslovakia, the very landlocked Czechoslovakians, had fought and won a naval battle against the Russians. This is the tale of the Battle of Lake Baikal, and how Russia lost to a country that is quite literally hundreds of kilometers from the sea. Now you may be wondering, and rightly so, just how does a Czech or a Slovak get on a boat in the middle of Siberia, and how does this lead to Russia losing a naval battle? Well, the answer is actually really simple, and I'm shocked you even have to ask. See, all you need is an archduke to get shot, which in turn triggers a worldwide conflict based on multiple complex alliances, all vying to both simultaneously establish and prevent a European hegemon from forming. And on top of that, you need a German to decide that Belgium is a good highway, 100,000 British professionals who can fire rifles like machine guns to break up the German advance, a failed campaign to seize Gallipoli coupled with 100 years of really crappy rule from Moscow, an exiled revolutionary moronic Tsar, a Siberian wizard dude with a big schlong to sleep with the Tsarina, a mishmash of empire about 100 cultures or so in a trench coat that annoys people in said empire, so much so that they go off to join foreign militaries to fight it. Oh, and you need a guy called Trotsky to do something extremely, and I mean extremely bloody stupid. Simple, right? Don't know why you had to question it. See, as the First World War got going, the Austro-Hungarian Empire found itself quite literally on the brink before the war even started. It's kind of why Ferdinand got shot in the first place. Which is really funny, because side note here, Ferdinand, the Archduke Ferdinand, was the one who wanted to give the Southern Slavs more rights in the Empire, so the Southern Slav terrorist group shot him when he was the only one advocating for them to get more rights. Serbia is an interesting place. This empire, though, the Austro-Hungarians, was an absolute mess of crowns, and fun fact, this isn't actually the flag of Austria-Hungary. Hoi4 has lied to you. It's the naval ensign. The state was such a mess that there wasn't actually a flag for the state. I'm not even joking, there were multiple. Within this abomination of a state, held together by mostly the sheer power of Franz Josef's mustache, along with some military power sprinkled in, existed the region of Bohemia, aka the future Czech Republic, and to the east, technically inside of Hungary, which was inside of the Austro-Hungarian Empire but was sort of separate but sort of not, was Slovakia. Together, they formed the dynamic duo of Czechoslovakia. The Czech bit of the duo included some of the most industrialized parts of the empire and really all of Europe, with brands such as Skoda headquartered there, and the inhabitants of the region had their own culture and way of life. Quite frankly, the Czechoslovakians together were absolutely sick and tired of being under Austria and, well, Hungary's thumbs. And they wanted independence. Not only did they want independence, but they were more than prepared to fight for it too. Seeing that the Austro-Hungarians were intent on going full tilt into Serbia for the shooting of the Archduke, men from Czechoslovakia, the majority of them were Czech, signed up and volunteered to join the war, fighting on the side of the Russian or French armies as a part of what would become known as the Czechoslovak Legion. Their motto was simply Nazda, or hello. The Legion, officially established in 1917 after years of hard fighting as smaller individual units, would find itself in the thick of combat during the war, often being reinforced by deserters who believed in a free Czechoslovakia, or more commonly by prisoners of war who were fed up with Austria's crap. In total, there were about 13,000 legionnaires in Italy, 9,600 in France, and a whopping lion's share of 50,000 in the Russian Empire. The only problem was, Russia had been beaten 6 ways from Sunday during the war, and it had just woken up from the latest beating with a slightly different personality change. I don't get the hype around Trotsky, I really don't. And I mean, Trotsky is such a Stalinist who wished they got to crush people with tanks anyway. So many people say that Trotsky is a super baker genius, but when you actually read into some of the things he gets up to, some of his theories and foreign policy decisions, he just seems like an absolute moron who thinks he knows better and somehow has managed to convince everyone that he has a brain. He's like the Wikipedia user on YouTube who makes videos. And then, has convinced everyone he's an expert. Don't know who I'm talking about there. Wonder who I mean by that. Basically, everything that happens from now on is on Trotsky's gigabrain and his plans to deal with both the Germans and the Czechoslovaks. Naturally, just because the Bolsheviks took power, the war against Germany didn't exactly stop, but for all intents and purposes, Russia's goose was effectively cooked. It lacked both material and motivation to continue the war. The Soviets under Lenin understood this, and although he would have loved to throw the Germans back to Berlin declaring communist utopias along the way, it really just wasn't possible. So Lenin, being the ultimate upper manager, sent his underling Trotsky to go and negotiate with the Germans, a peace deal that would allow the Russians to focus on pacifying the Soviet Empire, Russian Soviet Socialist Federative Republic, of total equals. So Trotsky, on his little mission from the boss, rocks up to Brest-Litovsk and has a chat with Oberkommando Ostfront Max Hoffmann and Foreign Minister Richard von Kuhlmann. Yes, the Austro-Hungarians and Ottomans were there, but like all negotiations at this point of the war, nobody really listened to them, and Germany was kind of just embarrassed to be seen with them. Trotsky, in this regard, was acting as the Soviet foreign minister, and he wasn't entirely pleased at the German terms, which, let's be clear, were horrifically brutal for the Russian economic prospects. There's a reason why the Treaty of Versailles was so horrific. It's because what the Germans did at Brest-Litovsk was a pretty well the equivalent. The Germans, acting on previous promises to Poles to get them on side, intended to liberate swaths of Polish territory. Now remember, Poland before the war, the heartland, was effectively all under Russian control. They also intended to establish a Baltic government in the, well, shockingly, Baltic states, and establish influence over the newly self-declared independent states of Belarus and Ukraine. The Central Powers sought these terms to effectively fix the looming food crisis that had been caused by the British naval blockade, and having access to the breadbasket of Europe, along with a massive new buffer region against any Russian counter-resurgence, meant that there would now be a giant army group able to move east to try and kick the Allies out before, well, the Triple Entente out, before the Allies, as they become to be known, form when the United States starts to arrive in force. Trotsky, though, knew that Russia couldn't fight this, even if it couldn't accept the terms, so he put his 2.5 brain cells together and decided he had this marvellous idea that he could just say the war is over, and it would be over. So our intrepid little communist walks into the meetings, right? Turns around to Kuhlmann and Hoffmann, and he says, "The war is over," and he leaves. The Germans, being their humorous selves, were not even remotely amused, and shockingly, to absolutely nobody's surprise, they just went, "Right, okay," and ordered their lines to advance. But you see, this is where Trotsky's genius comes into play, because he had this idea, right, that if the Russians just declare that the war is over, and the Germans advance, then the Germans will be attacking a neutral country, and the whole world's workers will rise up in revolt, because they're attacking the workers' paradise. Are you shocked to know that did not happen? Lenin wasn't exactly impressed here, and after having a go at Trotsky for being a fuckwit, ordered him back to the Germans, cap in hand, to accept the now even harsher treaties, because when Trotsky went back, he discovered that the independent Ukraine was acting totally independently and had signed a peace treaty with the Germans as an independent nation, and they now had German backing, and there were German troops in Kiev. That's strike one for Trotsky's brilliance. It turns out, when you're in a massive worldwide war that is causing hundreds of thousands of casualties, you can't just turn around and go, "Nuh-uh." So now, back to the Legion, and let's set the scene. It's the 14th of May 1918. Russia has finished its personality change from horrific empire with gold everywhere to horrific empire with red everywhere, but the state was about as stable as a house built on sand. At the time, the Legion found itself in the newly independent Ukraine, and given Ukraine was sort of under German protection, this is just before Brest-Litovsk, and there were a lot of Germans in the territory, the 40,000 or so Czechoslovaks were understandably a little nervous. The Ukrainians, though, likely feeling sympathetic to a group of people forced to live in a giant empire that they didn't want to, gave the Legion permission to leave Ukraine unmolested to make its way east. See, the Czechoslovaks were in a bit of predicament here, because they obviously can't go west because, well, Austria-Hungary rules their homeland. They can't go south because the Ottomans are there, they can't go north because it's straight to the Bolsheviks, and they don't really have supplies even if they can beat them militarily, which they will, a lot, but we'll get into that. So they have to travel from Ukraine all the way to Vladivostok, where they can try and get on a boat and travel to either France, Britain or the United States to continue the fight or to, well, settle down. But the signing of Brest-Litovsk makes this really complicated because although the Ukrainians themselves don't care that the Czechs are there because they're leaving, the Germans want to get rid of 40,000 really highly experienced crack infantry that forms the backbone of the Czechoslovak Legion before it can end up reinforcing the Entente. The only problem is that the Soviets had so thoroughly screwed the peace negotiations, and the Germans were now advancing again during Operation Volksschlag, that the Czechoslovaks had to now start fighting their way to even get out of Ukraine to continue to fight to get home. The Czechoslovaks fought and defeated the Germans at the Battle of Bakhmut north of Kiev. Knowing that if they lost, they were subject to execution by the Austria-Hungarians, they fought a force that outnumbered them significantly to an absolute standstill with such ferocity that they were able to break away. The Bolsheviks meanwhile didn't like the Legion, but on the flip side, they needed the Legion to avoid looking too pro-Central Powers and avoid an invasion from the Entente. But see, the thing about communists, in particular this variety of stupid Trotsky flavour, is that they have major trust issues. Now, the Legion just wanted to leave. I can't stress that enough. The Czechs and the Slovaks just wanted to leave. That's all they wanted. But the railway was mostly single tracks, and the Bolsheviks were so busy trying to get rid of as many Central Powers prisoners of war as possible, in line with the terms of Brest-Litovsk, that the Legion sort of got stuck in different places, and part of the Legion was stuck at the city of Chelyabinsk, trying to head east while a train full of Hungarians were heading west. And the Soviet Union's a complete mishmash. It's not the Soviet Union yet, but I'm calling it that because I'm not saying Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic about 50 times. But the Soviets were just a complete mess at the time. There's no real way they can get around this. They have to follow the treaty. But the problem is the Hungarians that were passing through on this happenstance day were fervent loyalists to Austria-Hungary and to the crown. And they started throwing barbs at the Legion, who they saw as traitors, calling them traitors, saying they deserve to die, yada yada yada. In response, the Czechs started throwing insults back, and eventually, somebody picked up a rock and threw it, striking somebody in the head, and bang, there's a riot. Trotsky and the Bolsheviks, going on their full Red Terror phase now, decided that they would use the riot as an excuse to order the Legion to disarm and hand over their weapons, promising them passage east, even though they'd already done that and then sort of left them stuck. The Legion meanwhile turned around and said, "No way in hell am I giving you these weapons, because you will just kill us." And yeah, fair call considering the wider picture and the Red Terror that was unfolding. The Czechs flat out said they just wanted to leave, that's all they wanted, but they would leave on their own accord with their own arms. Trotsky, being an idiot, naturally tripled down and went, "Give me your guns." And lo and behold, the literal army of professionals that had just broken the German advance on Operation Volstag, when they were outnumbered and outgunned, turned around and said no. That's strike two for Trotsky. He now leaves our story, but don't worry, he continues his little mess up of decisions right up until he gets ice-picked in Mexico. But we are now all caught up with the Legion holding the railway, the lifeline to the Russian Far East that Trotsky knew that they were there to do, and then he pissed them off. While the Legion was just trying to leave, and then the White Army and the Red Army now use this opportunity to start going at each other's throats. And that brings us to August 1918, where the Legion is attempting to seize control over the mountain passes around Lake Baikal, which are under complete control of the Reds. As the Legion continued east to make its way out of the combat zone into Vladivostok, part of the force under the command of Radola Gaj's path was blocked by the greatest of all enemies, geography. Between them and the freedom of Vladivostok stood the exceedingly long but relatively narrow Lake Baikal. Naturally, when you have a big body of water in front of you, your first thought is, alright, well, we'll go around it. But there was a key issue here because the region was a hotbed for Bolshevik activity. So the area to the immediate east and the city of Irkutsk proper, well, it was a complete hotbed for the Reds with its industrial working class. So the Legion was stuck. They couldn't go north because it's quite literally the Siberian wasteland. They can't go south into Mongolia due to supply lines, and of course the key mountain passes, they're all held by the Reds. There was really nowhere to go except for straight over it. But hang on, ho, how does a legion of soldiers using trains cross a giant lake? Well, I'm glad you asked. See, there's a trick to this. The answer is crime. As the Legion moved into the coastline of Lake Baikal, it began to occupy a series of ports along the coast, and in these ports, they found two steamships sitting pretty in harbour, the Siberjak and Feodosia. And they stole them, and positioned them in the port's town of Listvianka, where they found 4 howitzers and strapped them to the decks. The Czechoslovakians now had a navy. A couple of miles away in Misovsk sat the Russian Lake Baikal naval flotilla, and it consisted of the Baikal and the Angara, on the shore being supported by an armoured train which was sort of, going back and forward, back and forward. Now, back to geography. Keep in mind the Trans-Siberian Railway runs right alongside Lake Baikal and is well within range of any kind of aquatically based boomstick. Keep in mind as well that the majority of the Czechs and Slovak were spread out across Siberia at this point, and there was a severe concern that if the group that was at the lake passed east, yeah, they'd get through, but the Russians might just sail across the lake, land troops behind them, and split the Legion in two, cutting off and killing all of their comrades. This ultimately was the region that the Czechs seized those two ships and strapped guns on them, but the Legion was not waiting around for the Reds to just attack, and they were going to be a bit more proactive. On the 15th of August, 1918, the Legionnaires' little dynamic duo set sail to disable the other major port at Yusovsk, where the Reds were sitting with their two ships and, well, an armoured train. Now, I couldn't find much information about the exact specifications of the Czechoslovakian steamers, nothing I could verify with a second source or third source at least, but we know a fair bit about the ones used by the Reds, mostly because one is a museum ship, coated in gunk and crap in Irkutsk, and they were both actually flat pack imports from the United Kingdom, quite literally IKEA style. It would be absolutely no shock to anyone to hear that the Russian shipbuilding situation in Siberia wasn't exactly doing so hot in the 1910s. That, coupled with the fact all the imperial shipyards and basically every other shipyard was busy trying to replace the ships lost at Tsushima, and before that they were desperately trying to build up their naval forces in preparation for, the fact everyone else was doing it. The smart thing to do here, and what the local officials did in the late 1800s, was to order a pair of ships from the United Kingdom, at the time the world's premier shipbuilder and exporter. These two ships were the Angara, named for the river that the city of Irkutsk is built on and it feeds into the lake, and the other was named for the lake itself, the Baikal. In early 1895, the construction of the Baikal began at Armstrong and Whitworth in Newcastle upon Tyne, and it was pretty damn big. It was designed to carry a train, 300 passengers as well, and it weighed in at around 4,200 tons. She would be built and then sent in parts, like I said, IKEA style, to the lake overland on the train, where she was assembled over 3 years in a small village that she dwarfed on the lakeside. Her companion was the slightly smaller passenger goods vessel, the Angara, and it was built and sent in much the same way. Angara will come back into the story soon. I've got something to say about that boat, because good lord does it have a tail. The Legion's flotilla set off on a relatively uneventful cruise across the lake, where they encountered the SS Baikal tied up to the mooring at Misovsk, and armed to the teeth, with makeshift weapons bolted on the deck, much in the same way as the Czechs had done. The crew on the Baikal assumed that the ships approaching it were friendly, and you know what? I don't blame them. Who on God's green earth expects the Czechoslovakian Navy to randomly appear in central Siberia? The Legion, seeing the gigantic Baikal, set to work and set it alight, peppering it from stem to stern and sinking it at its moorings, possibly before it even got a shot away. The Legion then moved in closer and shelled the port at Misovsk for a few minutes. In response, the Reds brought up an armoured train and returned fire at the ships, who broke off and returned back to their ports. As they turned back though, they encountered the Angara, which, likely knowing what happened to the Baikal, because it could probably see it burning like a matchstick at this point, turned off and sailed away as fast as possible, in the other direction. The Czechoslovakians had officially beaten the Bolsheviks and won a naval battle, which gives the unique distinction to the Czechs and the Slovaks of having won every single naval battle they have ever fought. Which is one. They have fought one naval battle and they won it. While the battle wasn't exactly definitive in the grand scheme of things, it's quite funny that the Russians lost to a country that is so far landlocked it can't see the sea, let alone reach it. The Czechoslovaks had secured a land route to the east, and with the success of the Legion in Siberia, finally, the Legion got the help it needed to get out of Russia. The Allies would intervene in the war, opening up the Trans-Baikal region, and more than that, the Czechoslovaks began to receive genuine support from the major powers for the future of an independent Czechoslovakia after the war had ended. See, this wasn't a definitive battle, it wasn't huge, it wasn't massive, but it was just a little part of a much wider war, but it was a key part in getting the Czechoslovak Legion home. Now this is normally where the video would end, all wrapped up in a little bow, but there's just one more thing we need to discuss, and that's the wild ride of the Angara. Because after the revolution, it holds the honour of dubiously being quite possibly the most ever sunk ship in the world. See, while the Baikal sat sunk at the jetty until 1920, the Angara would go on to ply its way back and forth across the lake for 62 more years. Sort of. During the 1920s, the ship was on a short voyage when she struck rocks near the Ushanki Islands. She was later raised and returned to service. The Angara would technically be retired in 1961 without any further incident in those 40 years and laid up at Port Baikal. But I mean, we've all seen what Russian long-term storage does, right? Because in the 70s and 80s, she deteriorated so badly that she sank not once, not twice, but 3 times at her port. The third time left her on the bottom for 7 whole years. Eventually, the Angara was raised again in the late 80s and semi-restored, and today she sits on the shores of the lake in the city of Irkutsk as a museum ship. According to the museum when I was there, part of the reason she was restored, and this is based on a translation I got at the time, was as part of the celebrations of the glorious October Revolution and the Civil War and yada yada yada. You get the picture. Glory to the Soviet Union, that kind of stuff. The museum itself really isn't in the best shape though, and there's no heating or much ventilation, so in the winter she's an ice box, such as when I went. In the summer she's a sweat box. She stinks of paint, grease, grime, and whatever other chemicals they're using on it. The hull shows it's aged and rust. There's some significant and obvious weaknesses in the ship's structure. If you poke too hard on some of the interior walls, then your finger will actually bellow the wall because it's so rusted. The paint is just slapped on this rust, and well, in general, there's a lot of grime and gunk throughout the ship. So it's hard to tell whether or not it's in active service, honestly, with the Russian Navy. At least this was the case in 2016 when I visited her. But that's just the little story of the Angara, and honestly, even with her state being heartbreaking to say the least, having an icebreaker steamship from the 1800s sitting around that, you know, fought a naval battle against the Czechoslovakians, well, it didn't really fight, it kind of ran away, but you get the picture, is pretty damn cool. Interestingly, the museum also has the guns on the Angara, which, 2 stories based on the person who was there that I spoke to and then had it translated to me who runs the museum. Either the guns were the originals, which were thrown in the hull and just forgotten about and left there because they didn't know what to do with them, or they're just guns that were randomly found in a warehouse and then bolted on board, and they don't really know where they came from. It's possible, it's really unlikely, and it's impossible to prove without going and examining it, but they did tell me it was possible at the time, and I don't know how much of this is true or not, that they were actually guns left over by the Czechoslovak Legion, which, if true, would be absolutely hilarious. I just hope that the Angara manages to survive the impending doom of, you know, the Russian misery and economy when the population inevitably collapses because they all shouted "Oorah" and yeeted themselves into Ukraine's border. As per the usual, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. I've created a second channel for VOD uploads and maybe 1 or 2 other silly things, so give it a look and a subscribe. Thank you again to my completely awesome patrons. Your support is always welcomed and always appreciated. And I will catch you all next time.